I'd like you to close your eyes, please. I'm not going to run away. Please close your eyes if you trust me. I want you to use your imagination. Who do you think of? Who immediately comes to mind when I say to you, think of somebody who you are still struggling to forgive? Somebody you're still struggling to forgive. And as that person has come into your mind, we've reacted in various ways. Some of us have pushed them away because it's a Sunday, and Sunday's the day we're meant to be Christian, and so we pretend that actually it's all okay with them. Some of us, there was an immediate knot of anger at the injustice. For some of us, it was resignation, just, I know I haven't forgiven them. I know I'm struggling with it. Can we just move on? Please open your eyes. Thank you. Now, as I've raised the topic of forgiveness, some of you have already raised the emotional drawbridge in the castle of your life and have thought, I am not going to engage with this talk because it might be a bit uncomfortable. I just ask you to lower that drawbridge just a touch, please. Today, we are thinking about part of our vision as a church. Last week, we looked at everyone welcome just as they are, the first part of our vision. The second part is everyone involved in the transformation of themselves and each other. Everyone involved in the transformation of themselves and each other. How do we know if we are being transformed? Because I don't know about you, I'm not the finished article yet. I am way off the finished article, and I want day by day to become more like Jesus until when I breathe my last breath, I think, Jesus, you've been changing me from when I was 0 to when I was 98 and a half years old. Thank you. I think one way we can gauge if we are being transformed is, how forgiving am I? How forgiving am I? Forgiveness. Should we keep score on forgiveness? Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, definitely thought we should. We read in Matthew's Gospel where he comes to Jesus and he asks Jesus about forgiveness. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked in Matthew 18, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Or you can read the Greek there, 70 times 7 times. Firstly, why does Peter say up to 7 times? Well, because the number 7 in Jewish thinking was a number for completion. The 7 days or 7 periods of creation in that Genesis story, that Genesis poem, at the end of that, when God rested, it was completed. And so for Jews, 7 is the number of completion. So Peter's basically saying to Jesus, look, I'll do up to 7, because 7's when it's completed, when it's finished. After that, I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. And I kind of side with Peter a bit, don't you? If someone does something to me 7 times, then maybe by the 7th time I think, well, I'm done, I'm completed. But Jesus says, no, 77 times or 70 times 7 times. Now, Jesus here doesn't become a maths tutor at the beginning of the year, and he isn't doing a maths exam for Peter, because what Jesus is basically saying is, the numbers don't matter. Don't try and keep count when you are trying to forgive someone. Don't keep score. 77, 70 times 7, not 7, Peter. Don't try and keep score. Forgiveness. I want to share a few thoughts with you about forgiveness this morning, and one might really irritate you, and that's the one I want you to take away and think about and pray about and maybe talk with your home group or trusted friends or family about. Paul Tillich, the theologian, said one of the great quests for Christians is that we must accept our acceptance. That we must accept the fact that God actually loves us. And there are some folk in here this morning, and we would say that our label when it comes to God is that we are the black sheep of the family. That God doesn't actually love us. That God can't wash us whiter than snow. That God can't make us blacker than coal. That God somehow looks at us and thinks, well, Jesus died on the cross for everyone, but not really for that person. Because you think, well, I've screwed up far more than anyone else in this room. If we had a league table for sinners, I would definitely be in the Champions League positions. Because if this lot knew what I was like, They wouldn't even look at me. But Paul Tillich says we must accept our acceptance. God really loves us. Why would God go to all the effort of allowing his son Jesus and agreeing with his son Jesus that he would go and die on a cross in our place to remove all of that crud, all of that sin from our lives, and then God would turn around and go, oh yeah, but not you. No, it's for all of humanity. And we can accept that gift of forgiveness. The first thing I want to say about forgiveness is that it starts at home. If we don't experience God's forgiveness ourselves, it is jolly hard to give forgiveness to others. I'm in a Baptist minister's Facebook page. It's very modern these days. And I read one thread many, many months ago. And one of my fellow ministers had written something, and it kind of related to me. And they didn't mean to insult me in any way, but it really got me angry. I was fuming. And so I phoned one of my other friends for prayer. You know, when you phone to just offload, hoping that they'll agree with you and go, yeah, he's rubbish. Yeah, I knew he was. Yes, So I phoned my friend Simon. I said, Simon, this is what happened. And he said, okay. So Neil, what are you going to do about it? I thought, why do I bother phoning Simon? He's so Christian. I said, I guess I'm going to forgive him. He went, yeah, that's what you need to do. And so I got off the phone and I went for a walk and I forgave my Baptist minister brother for what he'd written. Now that person is not aware that I'd forgiven them. That person is not even aware that they've got me really angry. Because often forgiveness is a private thing. Please, at the end of this service, don't go up to someone and say, oh, John, I've forgiven you. Because John's sitting there thinking, for what? What did I do? And then John, because he's so caring, will think of loads of ways that he's upset me. He'll even invent ways that aren't true. I must have killed his unicorn. That's what I did. Because Neil loves his unicorn and I've killed it. See, I haven't got a unicorn, John. Okay. Don't go up to them and say, I've forgiven you. Sometimes forgiveness is between you and God for that person, and it never, ever goes wider. Corrie ten Boom was a Dutch lady who in the Second World War with her family hid Jews in their house, and one soldier betrayed her, and then her and her sister were put in one of the concentration camps, and a guard would come in and beat her and her sister regularly. He beat her sister so ferociously that he killed her. Can you imagine being in the concentration camp, sitting next to the dead body of your sister, who you'd promised, because she's younger than you, that you would protect, and you could do nothing as this man beat her because she cared for Jews? After the war, Corrie ten Boom went around Germany preaching in many of the great cathedrals about forgiveness. And at the end of each service, she would say to people, if you want to know God's forgiveness, please, as a symbol of that, come forward and I will pray with you. And Germans in their hundreds would come forward and down the aisle, and she would pray for them. And in one cathedral, as she looked up at the huge queue of people coming down to the front, she could see a man. And that man was the prison officer. He didn't know who Corrie ten Boom was. He'd beaten loads of people all the way through his career in the war. But she knew who he was. And the battle in her heart as he got closer and closer and closer. But Corrie ten Boom had made a decision that she would forgive people. And so when he came forward, she prayed for him that he would know God's forgiveness. Friends, forgiveness is hard. Anyone who says to you, oh, just forgive them, just forgive them, they've not been wronged. Because forgiveness is hard. We've been made to look like a fool. We have been betrayed. We have been humiliated by people we loved. Forgiveness is hard. When I was 18, I went interrailing. I travelled for 2 months around Europe. I washed my socks twice in the Mediterranean Ocean. I would hang them on our train doors so that girls and men would come, oh, we won't go in there, we'd stay away. It worked quite effectively. And one time we were on this Greek beach camping, and we were on the beach and we met these German guys. We were 18, they were in their early 20s. These Germans were huge. They had muscles in places where I haven't got places. And they were quite intimidating. And they were drinking beer, and they said, why don't you come and sit with us, have a beer? I sipped this beer, like, woo! And they were really going for it. And as they drank their beer and their hearts softened and their tongues loosened, and we sat under that starlit sky, one of them looked at me around the campfire and said, do you forgive me? I said, pardon? He said, do you forgive me? I said, forgive you? I don't even know you. He said, no, do you forgive me for the war? I said, pardon? He said, well, you're English and I'm German. And what came across to me in that moment was, here is somebody who has been taught about the atrocities that his country did in the Second World War, and he's not forgotten them. Sometimes we're told, oh, forgive and forget. But actually, sometimes it's unwise to forget. Forgiveness doesn't always mean forgetting. How many times have you sat with somebody in a coffee shop as they've told you, well, I've gone back to him again and I'm going to give him another chance. And you love this friend, this family member, and you've seen what this bloke has done to them 5 times. But they've just forgotten. Sometimes as Christians we think that we should be like this, forgive and forget, because we think that that's ultimate grace. But actually sometimes it's just absolutely unwise. And when I say don't forget, I don't mean get out that past hurt and polish it and caress it and play it over in your mind again. But just sometimes we need to remember some of the things that some people have done so that we don't get tangled up in them again. It doesn't mean we haven't forgiven them. It just means we're being wise. At my last church, there was somebody who I really didn't get on with. I know you can't believe that that would be true. And I write a journal, not every day, but just some days. I think it's a good way of keeping contact with God. It's not writing about the weather, or as my best mate Dave Hayward used to do, give each day a mark out of 10, depending on how well he felt he'd done. I mean, get a grip. But unless you do that and it works for you, that's brilliant. Give me strength. And I would just write a headline at the top of each day so that I would know the things that I'd written about that day. And then every few months I'd just flick through the headlines to see what God had been doing in my life. And as I flicked through the headlines of those last couple of months, this person's name kept coming up, probably about 6 or 7 times in 2 months. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, I've got a problem with this person that I wasn't aware of if I hadn't have written this journal. And so I began to pray about it. And what I felt God say to me, I didn't like hearing. I felt God was saying to me, Neil, to you, this person is poisonous. I love them completely. But to you, they're not good. They're not good for you to be around. Why? Because they bring out the worst in you, because they try and trick you in meetings, because they drag you down behind your back. Keep them at arm's length. I found it interesting since I've been here. If any of you speak to me in the way that that person did, I really have to battle to not transfer what I feel about them onto you. Because sometimes that stuff travels, doesn't it? And so I felt God say to me, Neil, keep him at arm's length. I emailed him and I said, I'm really sorry if I've offended you in any way. Please forgive me. I thought this is a risk, because I could get a whole list of the ways that I have offended him. And he emailed back a few days later. That was a long few days, let me tell you. And he said, Neil, thank you so much for your email. I feel like I've got my pastor back. And I want to say, please forgive me for anything that I've done to hurt you. And I did. But we didn't become bosom buddies because he wasn't good for me. And forgiveness, friends, forgiveness doesn't mean that we become friends with that person again necessarily. Because there are some people for us that it's not good to be around. If I am a drug addict, it's probably not good to go back and hang around someone who used to be my drug dealer. It's really simple and obvious. We need to keep them at arm's length. And there may be some people that we think, actually, every time I'm around them, I just get dragged down. Now, pray that God will transform you and pray that God will transform them. But there are sometimes limits for us as human beings. I really didn't like hearing that word from God for me. I struggled with it. But I found that it was true. I wasn't rude to the person. I wasn't aloof around them. I didn't avoid them. But I didn't get into deep conversations because I knew where they would go. When I asked you to close your eyes at the beginning and think of someone you're struggling to forgive, for some of us, the person that would have come into our minds was somebody we thought we'd forgiven and gone and done it all with and done the deal with ages ago. And as you were thinking of them, you're thinking, I thought I was over this. I thought I'd forgiven them. But don't you find that forgiveness is a process? That sometimes we think we've dealt with that person and we've moved on, and then somebody mentions their name and we just well up inside. And it catches us by surprise because we think we've done it. But actually, it's still bubbling along. And if you're like me, when that happens, we can really beat ourselves up. I think, I'm such a loser. I'm right down in the relegation zone of Christianity, because I can't forgive that person. But actually, it's an ongoing process. Just start to forgive them again. God, I thought I was dealt with this with John nicking my unicorn, but it's still real in my life, and so I'm going to forgive him again. And I'm going to go again. Because often what we do is, when we realise we don't forgive them, we just beat ourselves up. God doesn't want you to beat yourself up. God doesn't come to bring us condemnation. He comes to give us life. And so forgiveness is an ongoing process. Please bring up the next one, Andy. Thank you. Have you ever wanted somebody to look like a complete idiot? Have you ever, anybody who's wronged you, wanted to get revenge on them? Sometimes in Christian language we call it justice, and sometimes we mean it as justice, but often I find when you listen to someone, justice slides into revenge. And what they did to us, we'd like that to be done to them, but just a little bit more, so that they know what we feel like and they know what we went through. Forgiveness actually means wishing someone well in their life. It's not letting them off the hook. It's not saying I'll turn a blind eye. It's not saying I'll ignore it. It's saying, actually, God, I want to forgive this person, and that means I want them to have a good, whole life. That's challenging. That's difficult. We ran a group for people searching for Christian faith at my last church, and we had a meal with it, and my mate, who was a brilliant chef, came and did the meals, and as he was cooking the meals, I hoped that he would hear the Christian message, because he wasn't a Christian at that stage, although he's an absolutely brilliant blinding bloke. And one time afterwards we were chatting when he was washing up, and he said to me, Neil, I've discovered, and he's had a rough life, let me tell you, he said, I've discovered that if I don't forgive people, the only one who's imprisoned is me. And I thought, that's good. Because actually, when I don't forgive someone, I'm the one who's replaying that in my mind. That they may not even be aware that they'd hurt me. Or they may think it's all over. And so when I come in those doors for church and I think, right, they're sat over there, so I'm going to sit over there because I don't want to get involved in the conversation for them. Already there's a blockage between me and God in my worship of him. Because I'm so consumed with this person that I am unable to forgive. Forgiveness gives us freedom. It gives us freedom with our fellow woman, and it gives us freedom with God. Are you stale in your relationship with God at the moment? One of the reasons might be, not the only one of the reasons might be lack of forgiveness. That the harder my heart becomes to my fellow woman, the harder my heart can become to God as well. When I forgive, I open up that tap and the water flows. And I experience God's forgiveness and am more able to forgive others. How many times should we forgive Jesus? 7 times? No, 70 times 7 or 77 times, says Jesus. And then Jesus follows up this conversation that's not about maths with Peter with a parable. And he says, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. False promise, he can't pay back everything because it's 10,000 bags of gold. He's trying to buy time. The servant's master took pity on him, cancelled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins, not much. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I cancelled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. This is a parable that Jesus teaches. This is not an allegory. So often Christians take a parable and treat it as an allegory. Neil, what's an allegory? An allegory is a story where every single thing in it has a meaning. You know in Ephesians where Paul talks about the armour of God and he lists what each piece of armour means? That's an allegory. That is not what this is. This is a parable. And a parable has one meaning. One meaning. Jesus in his parables isn't trying to encapsulate all of the teaching of God. At that moment with that person, he wants to get one point across, and so he uses a parable. Something simple laid alongside something profound. And he talks about a bloke. What's the point of this parable? It's not that the master tortures someone. The point of the parable is this. If we don't experience the forgiveness of God, then we're probably not going to forgive other people. I'm not talking about knowing about forgiveness of God in your head, intellectually or theologically, knowing the right Bible verses. I'm talking about actually experiencing it, of actually being moved by God because of what God has done for us so that we know we're forgiven. When we experience that, we're more likely to forgive others. Last week I shared my life story with you and I told you about my dad who was the oldest of 7 when he was growing up in Maidstone. And when my dad was 15, he threw his dad out of the house. His dad was an alcoholic and not great in several ways to the family. And so when my dad was 15, he threw him out of the house and left school and went to work and gave 90% of his wages to his mum, and the 10% left he bought sweets for his 6 siblings. And my Auntie Jenny would store them by her bed, making sure nobody else would nick them. I met my granddad John twice in my memory growing up. Once he came to our house and he built a huge castle with me out of an old box, cardboard box and toilet rolls. I thought he was the coolest thing going with his shock of white hair. The second time I met him, I didn't really kind of meet him. He was at the front door knocking, trying to get in, and my mum was hidden behind the curtain on the phone to my dad at work saying, your dad's here, what shall we do? And I think my dad came home and told his dad to go away. You see, he was drunk. And the rule I found out when I was older was that my mum and dad said, you can see the family, John, if you're not drunk. If you turn up drunk, you're not coming in. And the next time I saw him was in a coffin as I read Psalm 23 at his funeral, having died from complications with alcohol. That funeral was difficult, not just because they'd lost someone, but because of the life that that man had led and how it had affected others. You can talk to my dad about his dad, and my dad, I think, is at peace. And the reason, I think, is this. that when my granddad was nearing the end, my dad, who had become a Christian at this stage in his mid-40s, went to visit him. And they sat down together. My granddad was in a Methodist home for alcoholics at this stage. And my dad said, I'm going to church now. And my granddad John said, I'm going to church now as well. And my dad said, I'm going to church because I help at Boys Brigade. And my granddad said, I'm going to church because I help at Boys Brigade as well. And my dad said, I've been baptised, I've become a Christian. And my granddad John said, I've been baptised as well, I've become a Christian. And they made peace. And forgiveness flowed. The deeper we experience the forgiveness of God in our lives, not trying to prove ourselves or repay a debt that we can never pay, the more likely we are to forgive others. That's transformation. Real transformation. Let's pray together. So what are you going to do with that person who came into your mind? Maybe receive some prayer here from somebody at the end of the service. Maybe talk to a loved and trusted one about how you want to be removed from the shackles of this unforgiveness. Maybe make contact with them. Talk to God about them. Or will we bury it deep and allow our hearts to harden just a shade more? Father, everyone in this room wants to be transformed, whether we would say we believe in you or not. We want to be the best versions of ourselves that we can ever be. And so we simply ask you to help us forgive those we struggle to forgive. In Jesus' magnificent name we pray. Amen. Friends, Vicky's going to lead us as we sing a couple of songs together. You may want to just, as you stand or sit, listen as others sing, as you reflect on what you've heard. But if you're able, please let's start as we stand together and sing.